is 3:30 p.m. ish Mountain Time. Cecil, Lammey, Andrew Mason, Denver Broncos, and so much to get to today. Mace, we had the pleasure of being on board for a Broncos press conference with Sean Payton and George Payton, although maybe Sean Payton got a little gritchy towards the end, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Nobody cares about us muggle types, Mace, but there's a lot to get to today, and I do believe you're writing about it, denversports.com. We've got a couple of your articles up about that now. It's our topic list here on my left. But, Mace, we got a lot to break down today.
Yeah, 50 minutes worth from Sean Payton and George Payton. I think Sean Payton is learning just how different things are in Denver than they are in New Orleans, because the questions probably could have kept going for another half hour to 40 minutes if the time had been afforded. Part of it is Sean Payton, when he gets going on something, when it's something he's okay talking about, he tends to say a lot. He tends to have very lengthy answers, and that, of course, leads to longer press conferences. As we found out in Arizona at his NFL League meeting press conference, if you ask him something that he doesn't really want to talk about, he'll be very short. Didn't want to talk about injuries, for example. Didn't want to really talk about Greg Dulcich, for example, down in Arizona. But today it was definitely more the effusive Sean Payton, talking about, even talking about John Elway. He went on for a while about how he and Elway have golfed together for some time, and John Elway's taken some of his money on the golf course over the years. Joked about how he's made Elway's retirement a little bit possible because of what Elway's won from him up in Coeur d'Alene on the golf course. So it was long, but it was long because Sean Payton, I thought, had a lot to say today.
Yeah, he does a Belichick once in a while where he'll just brain dump on you. And if you're fortunate, there's some good stuff in there. And I do believe we had some good stuff. Now, I will gripe a little bit, Mace, because I had my hand up. Didn't get a question in. My question would have been about the Shrine Bowl and the Senior Bowl. You'll be shocked to know that, Mace.
Stunned.
But I think because there's been limited access, we had others and all of our friends. So if I call someone out, it's not because I hate them. But when we have others asking, more questions about non-draft related, this is a draft press conference, yet we had a couple of questions, again, from our friends in the Denver media that didn't ask draft questions, and that probably caused because we don't get to talk to Sean Payton a whole lot like we used to other Broncos coaches.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there were questions about the offseason. There were questions about Jerry Jeudy. I'll tell you what, at the very end, I think it was Parker Gabriel, the Denver Post, asked about offseason work because, of course, they're in phase one. And Sean Payton had said that they weren't going to do the voluntary veteran minicamp next week because they were focused on lifting and running, and he mentioned that at the league meetings. What we learned today about that is they aren't meeting at all. Phase one, you could do a lot of meeting. You could meet with your players every day. And that's what the Broncos did last year. They focused on learning the scheme, trying to get things down, as well as the lifting and running. Sean Payton has them in to lift and run, and that's it. They're not doing anything in terms of installing the offense, learning the nomenclature, getting things down in that regard. He wants them to just lift and run, and you'll worry about the rest later. He said it's a philosophy that he got from Bill Parcells, so it's hard to quibble with this because that kind of thing worked for Parcells for many, many years.
Yeah, and I don't mind that being this part of the offseason because there's plenty of hard work, and not that lifting and running isn't hard work, but there's plenty of hard work, installation, playbook learning, all that stuff has plenty of time to be done, and trust me, the Broncos will be doing that. So, yeah, it's lifting and running time right now.
Yeah, and you know what? After what happened in recent years because of injuries, maybe it's a good thing to just focus on that. But the other thing that I think it says to me, if we kind of peel back the layers a little bit, is every scheme takes time to learn, but this is going to be a gradual process. This sort of tells me that Sean Payton knows he's here for the long haul, which I think is obvious based on the contract and the commitment given to him. But in terms of getting things right schematically, this is going to be something that happens year by year. It's not going to be a case of where he wants everything in right away. They'll probably be adding things a year, 2 years from now, and on into the future. And thus, I think this year it's going to be about kind of getting the basic fundamentals right, which is something that I think past Broncos teams haven't done. Like last year, Nathaniel Hackett, by his own admission, at the voluntary veteran minicamp last year, said that it was a, quote, very, very large playbook, unquote. And so that was part of the reason why the moment they got in, they were going into position group meetings, doing the Kahoot games, already trying to learn that. And as we look back on it, we've talked about the stuff that Tim Patrick said as you got deeper into the offseason about how much time they were having to spend in terms of learning the playbook. I think one of the things that sunk the Broncos last year was they were spending too much time trying to get it all down, and Nathaniel Hackett probably asked way too much of the team cerebrally in terms of learning things. This is a much more back to basics approach, and I'd say a decidedly old school approach to the offseason. And after the failures of the last few years, can't blame Sean Payton and the Broncos for doing this and embracing this.
There's nothing wrong with the old school as someone who still listens to Belle Biv DeVoe. Because that girl is poison. Anyway, you never know where we're going to go.
Now you know.
Orange and blue today. Now you know. Yo, Mace, blow. Okay, here we go. Talking about the lifting
It's driving me out of my mind.
I'll take the show off the rails immediately. I can do that.
Yes.
But we had a question, and this is from Edward earlier in the chat room, talking about, did they look comfortable next to each other? I felt, and one of the things I wanted to talk about is that you've got guys that the arguments have already happened. Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things I just talked about on the drive minutes ago, like, they're not going to be arguing in the draft room. I think all that stuff's been done. They've hammered it out. They have that lone vision from Sean Payton. And I think that's a fantastic thing because I've heard stories. My good friend Dave Rosano was in the 49ers war room the Alex Smith year, and he wanted Aaron Rodgers. And he was like yelling and screaming and throwing stuff. And I believe Scott McCloughan was in the room with him as the GM. And it was like one of these, like, some of the scouts were saying Alex Smith because they didn't want to make Scott mad. But Dave, being a guy that was there with the Joe Montana days, he wanted Aaron Rodgers. So you hear these heated stories, heated exchanges, you know, names thrown out. Those stories are bound in the NFL. It doesn't seem like that will be the case this year. So did they look comfortable? Did they not, Mace? Well, I think come draft night, they will be comfortable together.
Body language can deceive, so I caution against reading too much into like the way they were positioned for a pre-draft press conference. I don't think that's what matters. I think what matters is how they end up relating to each other in terms of the guts of what they're doing. And look, when you're talking about the draft, if you have a functional draft room, almost all of your decisions have already been made before the draft starts because you've stacked players up, you've made your board, and then you trust your board. If circumstances change to where you have to, you know, a player falls unexpectedly, and you're sitting there and saying, okay, we were thinking about taking position X, player X here, but we didn't see position Y falling. Frankly, I that's where maybe you have some discussion, but in the end, you lean on your board. And if your board said, okay, this player is player number 30, and this player is player number 43, and we weren't expecting player 30 to be there, then I think then that's where you lean on the fact that you've had the hard discussions already. And then you go from there. George Payton, I think it was George Payton today who also did allude to the fact that they felt like the roster was pretty well set in terms of a lineup, and so they could be flexible. And I think it was Sean Payton who also spoke about how when you're talking about who you're going to draft and making a plan, that you don't want to get locked into, okay, we have to pick this guy because we need this help right away. Because sometimes the better prospect is one for whom there's a longer term plan, and you might get more as you go into year 2, year 3. I'll be honest with you, when I heard them talking about that, you know who I thought of? A guy we've discussed this week, and that's Andre Carter. Because I don't think Andre Carter's going to be ready to do all that much this year. But his upside is through the roof, right? That's exactly the kind of player you should be picking as you get into day 3, even though others might help you more right now. Andre Carter's ceiling tells you there is the potential, if you incubate him properly and develop him properly, there's some superstar potential in Andre Carter because he has the mental makeup and the physical attributes.
Orange and Blue today, presented by Champ Honda, Cecil, Lammey, Andrew Mason. I loved when George Payton said, "We are preparing as if we're picking." I loved it.
Picking early, picking high, picking in round 1.
Yes, we are preparing in round 1 as if we are picking. And you and I will tell a little inside baseball. We've cautioned everyone here at Denver Sports and at the station, we have to be on our toes because I still get a feeling, and maybe it's lack of sleep or whatever, Mace, I would not be shocked at all if they pick on day 1. So when George Payton says that, I was just like a proud papa, just sitting there smiling, waiting for my question to be asked that I didn't get to ask. I was bitter for a while, but I'm over that now, Mace. But yeah, I was loving that when he said, we are preparing as if we're picking on day 1.
Yeah, and remember what I just said about how the board can fall a certain way? Well, let's say you're sitting there, it's getting deep into day 1, and a player that you had number 3 on your board happens to fall to pick 24. At that point, if you love that prospect, do you sacrifice next year's first round pick to maybe try and get that pick right then and there? Do you even consider revisiting the idea of trading a player? Now, George Payton did say that they don't plan on trading Jerry Jeudy. But he said 2 things. He said they don't anticipate trading Jerry Jeudy, that they anticipate him being there. But then he also said, well, he's going to be here. But when you say anticipate, that means, the landscape could change. And look, that's what could well happen. And there could be other players. I mean, I don't think that this type of deal could be made because I don't think he has the value coming off of the injury. But I know DMAC has suggested, hey, what if you could trade Garrett Bowles for a late first round pick and start the clock again with one of these tackles that could be there in the 20s, right? All of that could be in play as you get to the draft because there are no sacred cows on this roster, as we've discussed. And just because you've been around and have been a pretty successful player the last few years doesn't mean you're going to be in the mix permanently. I mean, shoot, what if Vance Joseph says, hey, we can get Budda Baker? And, I don't want them to trade Justin Simmons to get Budda Baker, but might they do it? I couldn't rule it out.
Well, you've said it before on this show, Mason. I think it's worth retelling quickly here. If the player, let's say it is Garrett Bowles, and then the player you're going to get is about the same, yeah, they do it because Sean Payton's looking for his guys. Not that Garrett Bowles couldn't be his guy, but they need to think about left tackle anyway. Like probably next year is when they more think about it, but that's part of the conversation.
Yeah, and the other thing, you and I were talking about Zay Flowers yesterday. What did you call it? Jock blocking?
Jock blocking.
Yes. Okay. Well, I presume the Broncos have done their homework on Zay Flowers because they're doing their homework on guys all through the first round. So, all right, the Chiefs may have a thing for Zay Flowers. Look, you don't have Patrick Mahomes work out with a wide receiver unless you don't see something in him. So, what's to say, again, you anticipate Jerry Jeudy being here, but, what if you could give a third round pick next year or even a third round pick this year and Jerry Judy for pick 27 and jump the Chiefs and get Zay Flowers. Then you've started the clock again with your potential wide receiver one instead of instead of year 4 going into year 5. You're back on the rookie. You're starting the cycle again. Oh, by the way, you might have kept him from being a really damaging player for your arch rival. I think maybe not these specific things, but I think you're going to see some stuff like that in play, and that's why. I mean, we just have to sit tight. I mean, I can tell you, Cease, as assuming my flight is on time next Thursday, I'm going to be sitting there watching the draft, ready to turn on my laptop, pull this microphone up, put on the headset, and jump on live with you to talk about what the Broncos are doing and why they're doing it. I'm going to be ready to go, and I know you will too. We'll be too.
Yeah, we'll be ready to go. And one of the other things that Sean Payton said that was so meaningful, I thought, draft capital is easy to get. He said that. He talked about the ease of acquiring draft capital. And everyone has often for years said it's so difficult and it's so hard. I think Sean Payton does have that different philosophy. And you know what? I'm here for grumpy Sean Payton. I'm here for it. I'm here for his way or the highway. And I'm here for him being able to be a little fast and loose with those draft picks. Now, not all of his picks. I'm thinking of Marcus Davenport. Like, okay, not every move has been like a hit instantly. But yeah, he's been used to being fast and loose with those picks, and it sounds like he still feels that way.
Yeah, and I mean, he alluded to how everyone's got the charts. Everyone's got the value chart. There are 2 or 3 of those value charts floating around. I mean, you've got the Rick Hill model, you've got the Jimmy Johnson model. One thing I've seen as you get into draft trades nowadays, and I don't think the Broncos are going to be at the center of this discussion, is what I call the quarterback premium, as in
yes,
if you are moving up or around in the first round to get a quarterback, usually that ends up extracting a greater price than other deals tend to. But that's also just due to the primacy of the quarterback position. But Sean Payton alluded to it. George Payton alluded to it. I mean, George Payton talked about how they had Greg Dulcich in their sights last year once the draft board started falling a certain way, but they felt like they could move down a few picks and still get him and add capital. I mean, so watch out for those deals. I mean, Sean Payton, we know he likes to move forward, but he also talked about moving back as well, right? So this is, I think you could see the Broncos being one of the more active teams over the weekend. And I actually, hearing Sean Payton talk not only about moving forward but also moving back, also told me that he and George Payton are on the same page, and there's going to be some pick splitting that happens if the moment and the circumstances are right to, say, turn pick 68 into 2 third-round picks, or via multiple trades, turn pick 68 into a third rounder, a fourth rounder, and a fifth rounder. I think we're going to see plenty of that.
Yeah, and Mace, honestly, if we're talking about moving back a little bit in the third round, I wouldn't mind being towards the end, because then you get to prevent anyone from being an early day 3 pick. You know what I mean? If someone's falling to those compensatory picks in the third round, I wouldn't mind if the Broncos somehow picked up one of those compensatory picks from whoever, because then if there's a player that you're not going to be able to get in round 4, but he's been falling, like, you can stop that bleeding for that player if it's a player you like. And I think clearly there's the difference in philosophy. Mike Kliss, with the very first question, right, talked about, well, you like to trade up and he likes to trade down. I think they're going to like to do what Sean Payton likes to do, and that's what's best for the Broncos.
Yeah, and what that is going to depend on how the board looks at that moment and what's going on and what players are falling. Again, I mean, that's and I think some of that, and I think part of that, if they see somebody falling that they love, that they had a top 5 grade on, and he's sitting there at pick 20 or 25, I also do not believe they will be afraid to sacrifice player capital. I do think they will hesitate to sacrifice next year's first round pick, but that's because of the overall landscape of how things look at the quarterback position and how the future might look. That's the one thing, and I maybe I could be wrong, but I think next year's first round pick is probably the point where a deal will be a bridge too far. But
Yes.
beyond that, I mean, they don't have their second rounder next year, but they have two third rounders, of course, because one of them was a exchange of the second and third in the Sean Payton trade, and they have player capital. I would not slam the door on the Broncos finding their way into round one, but my guess is it would involve players in the transaction rather than a great deal of draft capital. Maybe draft capital is a part of it, but I think getting in the first round would involve at least one player.
And I like how you're talking about the future, because that's truly what I believe Sean Payton is doing. And not to say that George Payton wasn't doing it or lacked doing it or had to be woken up to do that. No, Sean Payton's just doing that, though. Like, I agree with you that the first round pick for next year is off limits, because you need that asset in case you want to move up and get one of those quarterbacks, because this team is, it's like I said, Sean Payton's going to do what's best for the Broncos. And what's best for the Broncos is having yourself in a position to make a bold move to get that franchise quarterback.
Something hit me as you were saying that in the course of this conversation. We know that Sean Payton's a Bill Parcells disciple. He talked about that, and that's governing his offseason philosophy at this point of focusing on lifting and running and not schematic installation. So, with that being said, Bill Belichick also a Bill Parcells disciple. Go back to Bill's first year with New England, 2000, and he inherited Drew Bledsoe, then an 8-year veteran, pretty good quarterback, had taken them to a Super Bowl, had some success. But that year, the Patriots went 5-11. That year was a weeding out and evaluation year. Who's in for the long haul? Who's not? Now, the funny thing is, one of the players who established himself as being in for the long haul was Drew Bledsoe, because they redid his contract the following year. They were prepared to go long-term with Drew Bledsoe. Mm-hmm. Tom Brady was an accident. I mean, Brady is the happiest.
Mo Lewis, man. It comes back to that Mo Lewis play against the Jets. Drew Bledsoe, they were playing good football.
They were. Tom Brady is the happiest accident in the history of the NFL, because the Patriots' plan after that year, they doubled down on Drew Bledsoe. After Bill Belichick's first year, Belichick thought Bledsoe was the guy that he wanted on the boat, captaining the ship at that point. So it's interesting to look back on that. But that year, they went 5-11. They lost a bunch of close games. They actually had some positive results. They came to Mile High and beat the Broncos early in that season. But that year was all about evaluating the roster, evaluating every player, and saying who's in, who's out, who's going to be a part of this going forward. That is what this season is about. And it included the quarterback that year. It includes the quarterback this year. You are using this year to decide who is in for the long term and who is out. Any success, if we're talking about the playoffs, that's great, but it may not be the first goal of this year. The first goal may be sifting through this team and saying who's in, who's out. And I would argue that maybe that process has already begun. By the way, did you catch the little comment, the snide comment about the golf cart incident at the end, right?
Yes, I did.
I mean, he slipped that in there, right?
On purpose. Everything Sean Payton does and says is on purpose.
I had and I mentioned this in one of my pieces. I'm sure he has a similar vibe on what he sees from players outside of football that's in line with his old friend John Fox. Remember, the two of them were on Jim Fossil's staff together as coordinators with the Giants back in 2000 when they went to Super Bowl 35. And of course, John Fox used to say, "I only want to read about you outside of football if you've hit the lottery." So one can imagine, even though it was kind of accidental, whatever, one can imagine Sean Payton maybe wasn't very happy to hear about some of his players involved in a golf cart turning over at Arrowhead.
Right. Right. And Sean Payton will let you know. Two things
Yeah,
piggyback
he
on
did.
that,
I mean, he
Mace.
got that in right at the end. That was right,
Yes.
right
And
before
then
the
they
buzzer.
just got up and left.
Yes.
There
That was
wasn't any
like,
thanks, guys, man. We appreciate you. Sorry we didn't get to every question. Like Cecil sitting there with his hand up all day. Again, bitter. But it's like they just got up and left. Like all of a sudden it was just done.
yeah, he got in that last thing that he wanted to get in, and that was it.
Yep.
I think he would have found a way to get that in no matter what question was asked there at the end.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Even if I would have been able to. But anyway, Mace, two things that get brought up when you talk about that and the Drew Bledsoe. This is going to be an easy one for you, but I'm just going to ask it like this. What happened in 2001 when they had finally evaluated in 2000? And then in 2001, where did the Patriots wind up?
Well, they
Wound
wound
up in the Super Bowl.
Super Bowl, yeah.
Yep, Super Bowl 36, because I remember thinking the Mo Lewis thing, and then it was Drew Bledsoe who got him to that game because they were playing the Steelers, and I remember they knocked Tom Brady out of that game.
Yes.
And I might have been the AFC Championship.
It was
So
the
they
AFC
knocked
Championship.
Brady out, and immediately I'm like, yes. And then my mind goes, who's the backup? Drew Bledsoe. Crap. And
Yeah.
remember the controversy going the 2 weeks to the Super Bowl.
It was
Is it
only
gonna be
1
Bledsoe
week.
Or going to be 1 week.
It was
Is it going to
because
be
that's the
Bledsoe or
thing.
going to be Brady?
They flew straight to New Orleans after that game, and all week it was, is it Bledsoe or Brady? And
Right.
who's healthy. But it was a legitimate debate because it's the old thought of, do you lose your job because of injury? There were some in New England who thought Bledsoe should have gone back in when he got healthy because Tom Brady was good but not great. Okay, that's another thing. Like if we're talking about the mythology of Tom Brady wasn't Tom Brady probably until 2 seasons later. That year, he was a pretty good, serviceable quarterback playing within a scheme, but Bledsoe had more arm talent, right? And so there was a legitimate debate there and legitimate thought that the way Bledsoe looked in the AFC Championship game, that he should have started the Super Bowl and not Tom Brady. But it's just one of those fascinating things. Contractually, I don't think it'll work out the same way here because they were able to, while they did kind of double down on Drew Bledsoe, it's not to the same degree that the Broncos have this looming decision next offseason regarding Russell Wilson. But it is interesting to think that if they like what they see of Jarrett Stidham developing, do they ride with Stidham in 2024? I don't think it would be the Tom Brady type of year. But there are some parallels there to where you could be looking at success with a different quarterback coming in one way or another. But that being said, we also know what Sean Payton has said about Caleb Williams. And again, he wasn't a coach then, but everything Sean Payton says has some intent to it. So that's why if Russell Wilson struggles, are we going to be having the conversation about the Broncos trying to move up and be in position to get Caleb Williams? You're dadgum right, we are.
Yeah, we'll be having it early because
Yeah.
they'll be thinking about it early. Orange and Blue today, presented by Sean Honda. The other thing I think of when you talk about that and we bring up the Patriots 5-11 and Super Bowl champions, it can happen quickly, Broncos country. I'm not saying they'll win a Super Bowl next year or whatever, but like the way Sean Payton is doing it, this is the hard reset that you needed. This isn't easing in. They're going to see who wants to be part of the future, who's capable of being part of the future, who will be part of the future. And then the best thing, and they did say this today as we wrap up today's show, Mace, they talked about flexibility. Tom Brady wasn't the plan.
Yeah.
He became the plan, and they had a dynasty.
Yep.
Denver is going to have a plan, and right now that plan is Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson will get his fair shot, and if there is no future in that, they will move on.
And flexibility means, what if Hendon Hooker falls more than you expect? Okay? You're prepared for anything, right? If you have a good grade on Hendon Hooker and he sits there and somehow he's plummeting to pick 50, pick 55, do you have that conversation? Dadgum right, you should have that conversation. Unless you've got like a top 5 quarterback, you should have that conversation. because you should always be looking to add to the quarterback position. And to some degree, even if you've got a Patrick Mahomes, you're always looking to add to the quarterback position on the back end of the depth chart. But yeah, one way or another, by the way, I think they're going to add one more quarterback, either in the draft or priority free agent. But I think there's going to be another quarterback entering that room that they develop and see. But at the same time, they are looking over the horizon in next year. That is part of their planning as well. Is trying to make sure they're in position to do whatever they need to do to get that position right. And that's another reason why I don't think they're going to trade that first round pick next year. Why I think that's the bridge too far on any deal they might make, because they know that there's a very good chance they're going to need that. And oh, by the way, someone who also wants them to hang on to their draft capital and mention doesn't really want it. You're not going to see off seasons quite like this in terms of spending because it's going to be more balanced, is the guy at the tippy top, and that's Greg Penner.
Yep. 1,000% correct. We had so much to get to today. The stuff we didn't get to touch on,
we'll do it tomorrow.
Tomorrow's show, right? It is Orange and Blue today. Happy Friday Eve. The chat room saying go Avs. You bet your ass go Avs. Let's go get that W. Anyway, he's Andrew Mason. You follow him on Twitter at Mace Denver. I am at Cecil Lammey. It's Orange and Blue today, presented by Champ Honda, and we wish you to be safe, be kind, know that you're appreciated. Stay tuned, and as always, would you please do one thing? Stay frosty.